trustees, administrators, and staff of the Museum of the Confederacy, my fellow Americans. Perhaps no name in Civil War history is more familiar than Appomattox. Here it all ended. Here it all began. Here on Palm Sunday, 1865, two gentlemen basically declared, in the name of God, this is enough. And America's bloodiest war came to an end. Simultaneously, the Union of States at last became a reality. Modern America, the nation in which we live, came to pass. Thus, Appomattox, to me, is more a birthplace than a cemetery. Now, we meet today for several reasons. First, of course, is to unveil a monument to a legacy bequeathed to us on these grounds by men of another age. We gather here as well to dedicate a memorial to those who gave of themselves for the simple aim of making freedom and union one and the same. Most obviously have we come here to open a museum that for ages will remind not merely us, but the world, that patriotism is an inherited necessity in any country. The fightings on these grounds in the spring of 1865 was minimal, but the feelings are timeless. Virginia by then was one vast graveyard as the two opposing armies converged on the courthouse. Union forces were swirling around Robert E. Lee's ever-weakening columns. On April 7th, Chaplain Halleck Armstrong of the 50th Pennsylvania wrote his wife, quote, "We are picking up Rebs every hour. They are thicker than squirrels in the woods and make as little resistance. They are dirty, crestfallen, haggard, and nearly starved. But our boys are very kind to them. They have few garments to throw away. Their destitution is pitiful. Many are barefooted." And a Confederate across the way recalled at exactly the same time, during the last days of the retreat, attack came from every quarter, and the days and nights alike were spent in marching and fighting. There was not opportunity for sleep, and of food there was none. Suspense, despair, exposure, famine, and want of sleep caused men whose weak bodies could not sustain their dauntless calls to lie down on the roadside to await the coming of death from exhaustion. And after the surrender, Lieutenant David Champion of the 14th Georgia stated, "To some it was a sad occasion, and to others a joyous one. Some soldiers wept like children, some cursed, some were joyful that the inevitable had at last happened. After the surrender of our guns, the Yankees came over to our camp, mixing and talking freely with us. Not at any time after that did I hear a single discourteous remark made toward a Confederate." So it ended, so it began. The Civil War produced the nation we love and know. Of course, the healing process would take time. Yet it was a healing process, not an ongoing bitterness that saps the very life out of a struggling young country. Much of the brotherhood you and I have came from the soldiers who shared that war, and in doing so they came to realize that underneath the strong passions that had motivated them in opposite directions for 4 years, underneath it, they were still Americans. Johnny Rebs never apologized for what they had done. Billy Yanks never asked them to do so. So the unity of North and South today, after a war that consumed as many as 750,000 people, borders on a miracle. It has never occurred before in the history of man, and not likely ever to happen again. Mainly because, as Lieutenant Governor Bowling said, we are the greatest nation on earth. I truly believe that if there is truth in the phrase, God's chosen people, I am looking at them this morning. And that is why Appomattox and this museum looms large in the Republic's conscience. Today a national spotlight gleams on this section of Virginia and the historic jewel that is being unveiled. We welcome this exhibition hall and what assets it brings to the Central Piedmont. A number of facts underscore its importance, as well as the inescapable value of the time that it honors. Virginia, as you all know, was the principal battlefield of the Civil War. The Confederacy existed only as long as Virginia lived. Some 2,100 engagements took place inside our borders. We lost a third of our territory at the very start. The remainder of Virginia suffered more man-made destruction than has befallen any other sector of the history of the Western Hemisphere in its history. 1/5 of all Confederate soldiers were Virginians. More than 30,000 sons of the Old Dominion perished in that 4-year struggle. Anyone asking Virginians to forget those tragic facts is a request that lies between imbecility and insanity. The past is the past. It is what we do with the past that matters. Now, what we do with the past offers a variety of choices. The first is to try and forget history. Yet turning one's back on the past is suicidal. Any good history student knows that any nation which forgets its past has no future. The history of man is incontestable on that point. If you don't know where you have been, you don't have an idea of where you're going. Secondly, one can choose to interpret the past according to individual feelings, and that so often happens. Take the War of 1812, for example. The Americans think they won it. The Canadians know they won it. The British never heard of it. Similarly, from the Civil War came an end to slavery. From that war came the Emancipation Proclamation. We're talking about the same thing, or are we? Are we not perhaps looking at the same thing from two different viewpoints? A more popular mishandling of history is to twist the facts in order to suit present feelings. Its followers pursue a number of avenues, including once popular political correctness, but what is much more in use today is what is termed faction. It's a new word, meaning a work that is partly fact, partly fiction, with only the author knowing which is which. Such approaches are history's greatest dangers. You cannot change the unchangeable. Distorting the past dishonors everyone involved. Too many folks look at the past through the lenses of the present, and blessed by 150 years of 20/20 hindsight, they have the answer to all of the problems. That is dishonest behavior. Common sense should tell us that if a real United States had existed in 1860, Civil War would never have come. The all-powerful, all-inclusive federal government that watches over every action except the inertia of its own Congress was a creation of that war, not a factor when it began. Congressman Hurt, you and I are still good friends. The final alternative of what to do with the past is to remember it, to recognize both its warts and its beauty spots, to use history for what it has always been, the greatest teacher we will ever have. Harry Truman, who stands among the 5 greatest of American presidents, put it so succinctly: the greatest news we get is the history we don't know. Tourism remains one of Virginia's principal industries, and why should it not be so? We have more history than any other state. Sometimes galls me when I think back that the first representative government met at Jamestown in 1619. That was a year before the Massachusetts settlers even spotted land. So don't tell us who is the oldest in doing this, that, and the other. Central Virginia has always stood in the shadows of Civil War history. No string of major engagements is here to attract notice. No interstate highway courses through Virginia's belly and encourages sightseeing. Only a sprinkling of Civil War sites has existed to draw tourists from afar. That is no longer the case, thanks to what is happening here this morning. For decades, the Museum of the Confederacy has evolved into one of the nation's leading Civil War depositories. The volume and depth of its memorabilia is unmatched in Southern history. Yet the White House of the Confederacy and its attendant archives in downtown Richmond dwell for many, many years in what might be called respectful obscurity. 50 years ago, such a building as you see before you was not even a dream. A young graduate student visiting the museum in the late 1950s went to the entrance of the White House, which stood at the end of overlooked Clay Street. And in a cubbyhole just to the left of the front door reigned Miss India Thomas, a charming, ageless matron who presided over a home in which the floor of every room sagged from encased relics and bric-a-brac that would have made a flea market manager salivate. A dozen items were jammed in space while one would have been barely comfortable. And the researcher in those days went to the White House basement. There, in semi-darkness, were crowded shelves of books, boxes stacked in the floor, card files of every size lined against the wall, and unlabeled folders lying atop everything. And there, another spinster, Miss Eleanor Brokenbottle, oversaw the treasures. She did so with the vigilance of Catherine the Great. If Miss Eleanor liked you, hours could be spent digesting incredibly rich collections of manuscripts. If Miss Eleanor did not like you, well, seeing the catacomb was an unforgettable experience. What a shame those two devoted servants and treasured friends to a graduate student in the 1950s cannot be here today to witness a beautiful dividend from their years of devoted service. We owe those two ladies so much, and we give them our collective thanks. Today and for generations to come, what you see here is a collective effort by thousands of people who contributed in scores of different ways. To name them all is impossible, for this was truly teamwork on a gigantic scale. Even those in the principal roles are too many to mention. And yet, again as a form of repetition, and yet weight roles must be recognized. He has given unwavering leadership to the Museum of the Confederacy in often tumultuous times. Every American of every age owes him a debt of gratitude for what he has given to Confederate history. And this building would not be here in Appomattox without the strong, steady support of the William B. Jameson family. They have been the Rock of Gibraltar from beginning to end. Now, Bill may not understand that reference. He takes pride in saying that he graduated from Virginia Tech without ever going to the library. In the face of such admitted illiteracy, his generosity is truly remarkable and commendable. To the Jamesons, who have been genuine friends for many years, I express publicly our heartfelt thanks that they chose to name one of their facilities for my family. It is an honor we will forever. In its 122-year history, the Museum of the Confederacy has established a reputation as the primary depository for Confederate memorabilia ranging from uniform and flags to belt buckles and camp equipment. It also has a research library and photographic file that no serious student of Southern history can overlook. As from the beginning, the museum's holdings far exceed its physical capacity for displaying them all. But now the museum has opened its first extension. It is a state-of-the-art structure with over 300 artifacts, some never before seen by the public, as well as audio-visual mechanics, classroom, temporary exhibits, gift shop, and I add a security system of a quality equal to the contents it guards. You people with sticky fingers, be careful. This is a major addition to the present and future in Central Virginia. It makes history even easier for available to the slowest learner. Reading about the past, of course, is educational. Watching things on the television screen can occasionally have value. But when one can see history in a glass case, hear words of emotion emanate from the relics of yesteryear, or perhaps touch the past lying on an exhibit table, then all of one's senses become instantly involved in an unforgettable way. We can verily relive the Civil War and its lessons because a museum like this brings it alive so vividly. A half-century ago, Arkansas Senator William Fulbright visited the mother state and commented, "The air in Virginia is charged with reminders that the earth does not belong to the living alone, and the past does not come into being and then say farewell forever." Virginians, the senator added with a twinge of envy, possess a mystic sense of a continuing contract from generation to generation. And here stands such a contract. Visit it often. Absorb its teachings. A survivor of the Civil War observed just before his death, "I do not despair of the future. The march of progress is so slow, and our desires so impatient. The life of humanity is so long, and that of the individual so brief, that we often see only the ebb of the advancing wave and are thus discouraged. We must not be. It is history that teaches us to hope." The speaker was Robert E. Lee. Welcome to the Museum of the Confederacy at Appomattox.